Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Very good morning indeed to you. We will concern ourselves with British politics for the entire programme, quite possibly today, certainly the first 2 hours, and then that interest rate rise likely to happen at 12. We'll be looking, if and when that occurs, at what it means for you. Regular listeners will know that if we elect to postpone Mystery Hour, it means that events are momentous. But I'm going to begin with stories that won't be getting the coverage they deserve. And there's a really, tragic reason, actually, why these stories aren't getting the coverage they deserve. It's at the very heart of what I would loosely describe as a national crisis now. It's certainly a massive crisis in journalism, because so many newspapers, and still we turn to newspapers for our diet of conversation most mornings, most newspapers now are in a position of almost untenable hypocrisy. Think about this for a minute, okay? Imagine that Brexit had never happened, and that the number of nurses coming here from the European Union had, for reasons that we couldn't understand, plummeted by 90% in the last 18 months. 90%, okay? Now imagine if we had a story about, let's imagine that the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union had spoken in Norfolk yesterday and very simply said, are we seeing fruit and vegetables rotting in the fields? Yes, we are. Fruit and veg is rotting in the fields, and still we see no action. We are making a compelling case, but we need the government to act. We knew 5 years ago that we would be facing a Labour shortfall, but then we had Brexit, and that massively exacerbates everything. So all these Tin Pot patriots who talk about the national interest and taking back control, and all of these ludicrous newspaper positions adopted by men of almost unbelievable ignorance, are now coming home to roost. But most of us won't notice until it's too late, because the same people who told us everything was going to be great are in charge of deciding whether or not we get told about the truth. So I had to dig into the Eastern Daily Press this morning to find out what the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union was saying yesterday about a 29% Labour shortfall, and the fact that fruit and veg is now, in the words of the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union, rotting in the fields because people aren't coming to do the work that they used to come to do. It was already a problematical area which has been rendered a nuclear level crisis by the Brexit vote. And even if they get their seasonal agricultural workers schemes, that involves persuading young people in these countries to come here and slave through the summer in return for a relative pittance, when they could go elsewhere. They could go to countries where they're actually allowed to live, as opposed to just get bussed in as cheap labour. Happy days, okay, but you're probably not aware of this, because why would you be if you're relying on the Times or the Sun? Not the Times have printed it actually, but if you were relying on the Sun or the Daily Mail. The Telegraph, oddly, seems to be undergoing some sort of internal coup at the moment, because they are printing some of the stories online that make an absolute mockery of what they're putting on their comment and opinion pages. So then we move to the NHS, and this story can't be kept under wraps, because it's been revealed by the Nursing and Midwifery Council. Their register has seen a huge decline in the number of nurses coming here to work. I say huge, maybe I'm exaggerating. 89%. An 89% shortfall in the number of qualified nurses and midwives coming to work in Britain from Europe since we voted to leave the EU. And that tallies also with a 67% increase in the number of qualified European medics leaving the Nursing and Midwifery Council's list of registered practitioners. And so I turn to my inbox, and I already have messages like this coming in from Ruhe, who writes, let me get this right, we had to close an entire ward over the weekend due to nursing shortages. 60% of our nurses were from the EU. So what question do I ask you? I want you to talk to me in a way that, how can we put this? Avoid some of the usual pitfalls, because I have to tell you now that it feels to me like being married to an addict, this period of British politics. We spoke a lot yesterday about fixed odds betting terminals. We have in the past spoken about drug addiction and alcoholism, and the sheer impotence that partners feel as their loved ones embark upon this epic act of self-destruction is so profoundly moving that I hadn't registered until yesterday when we were talking about fixed odds betting terminals, that's where Brexit is now. I don't know how the country breaks down, but those of us interested in facts and numbers and statistics and truths are watching our loved one, our other half, if you will, on a national level. We're watching them smash themselves in the face on a daily basis in the forlorn belief that there's some massive jackpot around the corner. This is precisely what it must be like, what it must feel like to be married to someone who's putting his wages into a fixed odds betting terminal every Friday. Must just be absolutely awful to just sit here watching him hurt you, hurt himself, hurt your children, hurt everybody, while still insisting that he's about to come good, he's about to hit a winning streak, it's about to go well. And of course, he may not know just how bad things are because he's persuaded by the psychology of the flashing lights on the machine, and he's persuaded by his own addiction that success is just around the corner. There is no positive spin on the fact that 90% shortfall in the number of people coming here to work as nurses has been registered since that vote came in. There is no upside to the fact that the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union has described food rotting already in the fields because people don't want to come here to do work that they were previously doing. And those are just two stories, the first two to pick up. 10 minutes after 10 is the time. What's it like in the catering industry? What's it like in the hospitality industry? What's it like now to actually fill jobs that were previously done by people who felt very welcome and now just don't? Regardless of whether or not they're still allowed to be here, people don't feel welcome anymore. And it's very important that we look at why this is happening in isolation almost, on a sort of academic level. It's clear to me that the difference between tabloid journalism and proper journalism is the targeting. It's about getting the biggest emotional reaction from a story rather than providing the most factual analysis. Okay, that is the fundamental difference between what used to be called broadsheet journalism and what is still called tabloid journalism. The distinctions don't hold true anymore because, the Telegraph, for example, is sometimes out Daily Mail's the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail is descriptively a tabloid. But think about how they cover a story, whether it's about poppies, whether it's about school dinner ladies, whether it's about lollipop ladies, whatever it's about, there has to be a target. There has to be somebody for you to get cross with, okay? That is how tabloid journalism works. You have to get cross with the European Court of Human Rights. You have to get cross with the police who've dared to, paint their fingernails in an attempt to bring attention to an important issue. You have to get cross with the firemen who've wasted 3 engines going up to get a cat out of a tree. They give you the news in a way, and it's not confined to newspapers. Broadcasters do it as well. But they do it in a way that is absolutely explicitly designed to enrage and infuriate us. And it works. I mean, it's a supremely successful business model. The commodification of racism over the last couple of years by outfits like Breitbart and the, utterly out there bonkers InfoWars. That's a good business model as well. These guys are making money. And they're doing it by frightening and enraging us. And most stories, almost all stories, can be manipulated in such a way to outrage and frighten us. But these stories can't. Because if you were to dig into the collapse in the number of nurses coming here from European Union countries, if you were to dig into the fact that food is now rotting in the fields, if you were to wonder why the government is so desperate not to publish the details of its own impact assessment reports, all 58 of them, if you were to dig into any of these stories in a traditional tabloid fashion, you'd be left with the absolutely unavoidable conclusion that the only target at which you can hurl your darts are the people that told you Brexit was going to be a good idea. And when you break down Fleet Street, when you break down the national newspapers in this country, you're looking at about 80% of them falling into that camp. So this is a national crisis. I know that sounds a little bit excessive and a little bit over the top. And the two examples we've got today, nurses and farming, although you could quite easily point out that the supply of food and healthcare are arguably, alongside education, two of the 3 most important platforms of a functioning society. But let's park that for a minute and just understand why this is a national crisis. Who do you rely on for your news? The BBC's tying itself in knots trying to be impartial at the moment, because you can't be impartial when you're reporting on people who believe that the earth is flat, or economists who are talking absolute nonsense. But the BBC, it's why I'm not going to work there again for a while, because you can't do that. That's not impartial. You bring on Galileo Galilei to explain that the earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around. If you were doing that for the BBC in the 21st century, you'd have to invite Nigel Lawson or someone on to explain how actually no, the sun revolves around the earth, and we can still prove it. You've got these weird perceptions of impartiality which have been completely created by newspapers and I mean people a bit like me, but on the other side of the truth, people who are, if you will, professional agitators in the broadcast industry. So now we are seeing crises unfold going largely unreported. That is a threat to democracy itself, because an ill-informed population cannot make a proper democratic decision. We've already seen the dangers of what an ill-informed population will do with something as powerful as a binary referendum. An ill-informed population, actually a deliberately misled population, because ill-informed makes it sound like it's the voters' fault. A deliberately misled population, whether it's David Davis talking about being able to do deals from the minute that the result comes in, whether it was Boris Johnson echoing those sentiments, whether it's Liam Fox saying it's all going to be really easy, whether it's all those liars now saying that we always knew we were going to leave the single market, rather than in the run-up to the referendum swearing blind that absolutely nobody is talking about doing that. Wherever you look, the media manipulation of the British people was absolutely unbelievable. Even Wikipedia has adjudged the Daily Mail to be an unreliable source for information. It is not a reliable source. You want a quick example? Okay, I'll give you a quick example. When they reported last week that the OECD had said that Brexit was going to be like the Blitz, the Daily Mail pulled them to shreds, described the organisation as being completely unreliable and untrustworthy. Go back to when John McDonnell announced his plans for a universal basic income, and the Daily Mail described exactly the same organisation as being an absolute paragon of fiscal virtue. So when they say something that Paul Dacre likes, they're brilliant. When they say something that Paul Dacre doesn't like, they're awful. And the truth can go swing. The truth can just go begging. So we are now reaching the point where not only have they conducted their own impact assessment reports that they don't want us to see, some ludicrous lie about, it would undermine our negotiating position. No, it wouldn't. It would show the British public in absolutely uncontrovertible technicolor that we are now punching ourselves in the face on a potentially fatal scale. So we can't see those. And when the news provides the kind of evidence that these impact assessment reports would contain about, for example, the impact on farming, well, food is already rotting in the fields. About, for example, the impact upon hospitals, well, there's already been a 90% shortfall drop in the number of nurses coming and a 67% increase in the number of nurses leaving. All of these are impact assessments based upon reality, based upon counting. But you're not going to get to see them either unless you tune into this programme or find yourself trawling through newspapers like the Eastern Daily Press in pursuit of interesting interpretations and proper news. What are we going to do, guys? That's my question. What are we actually going to do? Now that the news is dead, now that the news is whatever Paul Dacre decides it's going to be, whatever Rupert Murdoch wants it to be, now that you know if you could blame unemployed people or Muslims for the fact that food was rotting in the fields, it would be on the front page of your newspaper. It would be the only topic we'd be talking about on LBC. If we could blame Muslims for the fact that food was rotting in our fields, there'd be no other story in town. But we can't blame them, and we can't blame the unemployed, and we can't blame single mothers, and we can't blame immigration. The only people we can blame for the fact that food is rotting in our fields are the people who've spent the last 20 years blaming immigration for everything. The people that told you to vote Brexit. The people that have actively picked your pocket and told you to say thank you for the privilege. I'm a little late for the break, and I haven't asked you a question yet. What are we going to do? What are we actually going to do now? At what point do we say, I don't want food rotting in the fields. I don't want nurses quitting this country in their droves. I don't want the NHS to be forced to close wards because it simply hasn't got the bodies. At what point do we put our hands up and say, whoa? My fear is we never will. The number you need to calm my conniptions is 0345 6060 973. And well, it's contingent upon somebody to keep pointing this stuff out, because hardly anybody else in this so-called profession is bothering. The people who encouraged us to vote to leave the European Union are in charge of the flow of information about what it's going to mean. So at a political level, you now have a government seeking to suppress its own impact assessment reports. Just let that hang in the air for a moment. Seeking to suppress its own impact assessment reports. The government's undertaken 58 separate inquiries into almost every sector of British business and asked a very simple question. What is going to happen in these Brexit scenarios? The good deal, the bad deal, the hard deal, the soft deal, the no deal. What is going to happen? And they've got 58 reports telling us what is going to happen, but we're not allowed to see them. Even members of the cabinet haven't been allowed to see them. The people who told us to vote for this won't let us see what it's going to mean. You can possibly conjure up a positive analysis of that situation. I can't. And then we come to the newspapers. We come specifically to the Daily Mail, somewhat less so to the Sun, and of course to the Daily Telegraph, that bastion of anti-elitist journalism owned by the same men that own the Ritz Hotel. And they're still doing it too. They're not giving us the information that allows us to form proper opinions. Why? Because if we had the information necessary to form proper opinions, we'd realise that they have conned us. Every single one of them. Imagine, again, if you could in some way blame immigrants or unemployed people or single mothers or Muslims for the fact that the NHS is hemorrhaging staff. Imagine where it would be in the context of the Sun's front page or the Daily Mail's. If we could blame Muslims for the fact that fruit and vegetable is now rotting in the fields of Britain, where would that be on the news agenda? But we can't, because the people responsible for these crises are the people deciding what appears on your front pages. And that, for the first time in my life, has become frightening now. Frightening. Quote from a cabinet minister. If we carry on with Brexit, we're going to wreck the country. But if we stop, we're going to wreck the party. Just let that pause. I don't think you're a racist if you voted to leave the European Union. I don't think you're stupid or uneducated or anything like that. But if the people that told you to do it won't let you see what's going to happen, you need to ask yourself why you think that is. What are we going to do now? You and me. What are we going to do? Jamie's in Chester. Jamie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I think the problem, broadly speaking, is that the average person, like me, is reliant on other people scrutinising the decision makers in order to be properly informed. So traditionally, you have the government scrutinising positions to decide what to do. You have other politicians and the houses scrutinising the government to ensure they're doing things right, and you have the media scrutinising all the politicians. The problem is, in the past few years, is that those people who should be scrutinising, particularly the media, seem to in large parts be actively trying to suppress scrutiny. The reason for that is that an awful lot of people in positions of power are acting on the basis of their own self-interest and not others.
Is it even self-interest? You know, I'm fascinated by the editor of the Daily Mail and his peculiar, vainglorious psychodrama, because these people tell us they're proud of the country and they talk about patriotism. And I was just making a little list of the things that he's attacked recently. He's attacked the independence of universities, academic independence. He's attacked the established church when the Archbishop of Canterbury had the audacity to suggest that we should do more to look after poor people, and some government policies appeared to be doing the opposite. He's attacked the independence of the judiciary when he had that, was it Enemy of the People headline after judges had the audacity to hand down independent judgments. He's attacked parliamentary democracy with the Crush the Saboteurs front page, which effectively said that MPs should shut up about what their informed opinions are and do whatever he wants them to do. So that's the church, the parliament, the judiciary and the world of academia that Paul Dacre has maligned and attacked and undermined while claiming to be proud of Britain. What are these people proud of, Jamie?
I'm not sure what they're proud of. They're pursuing power and influence, broadly speaking. I mean, I'm not sure what the end game is for individual people. A lot of people, including politicians, I think are being convinced to maintain an ideology that's damaging without realising that it is. So a lot of politicians and a lot of people holding views are just genuinely and honestly ignorant of the position, and people like Paul Dacre are perpetuating that in what they do. I think it is just broadly power and influence. I'm sure there is a more precise reason with some elements of it, but I don't know exactly what that is.
Then you're not much use to me, I say very affectionately and gratefully, because it possibly we're trying to rationally understand something that is by definition irrational, driven by phobia, driven by fear, xenophobia, driven by racism, some sort of tin pot 1950s dream of a Britain that never actually existed. So you and I are never going to be able to rationally unpick the motivation behind pursuing that worldview.
No, that's true. I mean, your question was what do we do?
What do we do? It's a genuine question.
The answer as to what people like me can do, unfortunately, I think, and I don't want to be too pessimistic, is not an awful lot, because we're reliant on other people. There are people like yourself and other people within media and politicians who are trying to ensure that scrutiny can happen, and we saw the House of Commons yesterday in terms of bringing out the Brexit impact studies. These people are making attempts to scrutinise these positions, and But the clamour,
I mean, I've got to tell you, you're not blowing my own trumpet on this, but you've got to be made of pretty strong stuff to put up with the abuse that you receive simply for trying to do your job. You know, this is journalism. These are numbers. This is counting. These are facts. This is the Deputy President of the NFU. But, you know, last week the Daily Mail had another pop at me. Last year they had a pop at me at the same day I won my Broadcasting Press Guild Award. It's not a normal way to earn a living, this, mate. It really isn't. To be doing journalism and then getting attacked by other journalism. Peter Mackay in the Mail last week suggesting that Jacob Rees-Mogg might want to replace me permanently. It's nuts. It makes me laugh, but it's not easy to do the scrutiny, and my voice is tiny compared to these other people.
Yeah, and frankly, rather you than me, simply because even being on social media and Twitter at the moment is extremely difficult because of that degree of abuse. It just seems to be perpetuated. It's perpetuated to stop debate and scrutiny.
But because it's a celebration of stupidity. We lost, you lost, we won, get over it. What did you win? End of conversation. I have absolutely no idea what I won. But I won, and you should shut up. Stop pointing out that we've all lost. It's surreal. It's Kafkaesque.
Yeah, well, it's not just the you won, we lost. It's the simple referring to people as Ramonas, snowflakes, and to be fair, people on the Remain side do that sometimes with Brexiteers as well.
Absolutely. And even if they don't, of course, that fringe of Brexiteers that wants to turn everything violent and binary will pretend that they have been insulted. It's like, you know, James thinks everyone who voted Leave is racist. What, including my father-in-law and my daughter's godfather? You think I think they're racist? Of course I don't think they're racist, but if you can shut me up by pretending that that's what I think, then mission accomplished. What are we going to do, Jamie? What does a fight back look like, regardless of the referendum, just in terms of the public getting access to truth?
I think one of two things happens. One of them is certainly better than the other. One thing is that somehow evidence is obtained or a breakthrough is made in terms of
Project Fear. Project Fear. Here's some evidence. Project Fear. Don't believe it. Nonsense. Fake news.
If something like the Brexit impact studies are published and they are as damning as a lot of people suspect they're going to be, it may be that a piece of evidence like that is sufficient.
So you see something that could break the dam, something so huge, like Barnes Wallace's bouncing bomb could come bouncing down the lake and hit the dam and explode. The problem is that most of the most powerful journalists in the country will pretend that there's no bomb. They'll be writing about something else. They'll be sticking on the big days of Brexit news. They've fallen on this sex scandal story with unseemly glee because it means they can avoid reporting on the government's loss in the House yesterday on the Brexit impact assessment report.
Yeah, which means that the thing that comes out has to be significant in terms of its scope and scale. The other way that it happens is the way I prefer it not to happen, which is that a consequence happens that's so significant whereby people all of a sudden realise something bad has happened. But the problem is,
it's too late to undo it by then. This is, I've got two friends, one who voted to remain and was heartbroken because he's of Greek extraction, and one who voted to leave and holds a very academic analysis of the situation. They actually both agree that we're going to have 10 years of absolute chaos and turmoil that will teach the British people about the importance of some of the institutions that they've been encouraged for the last 10 years to malign and denigrate, but I don't want that for either of them, and I certainly don't want it for my children or your children. 10 years of turmoil, and then hopefully we'll be almost back to where we were before. What do we do? How do we ensure that ordinary people get given facts, like the collapse in nursing applications, like the food rotting in fields, when any attempt to provide information such as that is shouted down by the most powerful men in the media? 10:32 is the time. First rule of patriotic Christianity: never ever describe yourself as either patriotic or Christian. But I'm going to break that rule today, because when I read tweets like this from Annette, it's hard to feel sympathy for farmers who in large numbers voted for Brexit, particularly in Norfolk. What were they thinking? I have to tell you that it's not. It's not hard to feel sympathy for these people. It is a patriotic and a Christian duty to feel sorry for people that have been lied to by their supposed betters. Farmers voting to essentially leave food rotting in their own fields. Farmers being encouraged to vote to go bankrupt by men embarked upon ego trips and weird, vainglorious psychodramas. So no, Annette, I'm not having a pop at you, but I do feel sorry. I have enormous sympathy for even the people who still insist they haven't done anything wrong. Because I don't enjoy seeing other people get hurt, even if it's people I've argued with. I don't enjoy the thought of you turning up at hospital next week and discovering that a ward is shut because they haven't got the staff. And one of the reasons why they haven't got the staff is because people from the European Union have already left, and people from the European Union who would have once come here aren't coming anymore. And then the food prices and all of the other stuff that will be contained within the Brexit impact assessment reports that you're not allowed to see. Why not? Well, the official line is, it would undermine our negotiating position. But if you've heard a Conservative politician or a member of this government explain precisely how that works, then let me know immediately. Because all I've heard when they're offered up these questions, all that I've heard when they are given these underarm bowls by journalists, all I've heard is them saying the most important thing at the moment is to get the best deal possible, to which no one ever responds by saying, will it definitely be better than the arrangements we currently have as members? That debate's gone. Why? Because the people in charge of the news have stuck so much on this story. They've backed Brexit so slavishly and completely, they can't tell you the truth anymore. For Paul Dacre to start printing the truth in the Daily Mail would involve him admitting that he's been lying to you for decades. It's not going to happen. And if you think I obsess a little bit about the Daily Mail, trust me, compared to Theresa May, I barely notice its existence. Every decision she takes, every appointment she makes, every move, I'm sounding like Sting now, she's looking at Paul Dacre. And Paul Dacre, he'll be watching her. And the subversion of our democracy, the undermining of our freedoms, and the fundamental assault upon our most basic rights, academic freedom, independent judiciary, representative democracy, it's all going. He's attacking it all. Why? Because he's mad. He's actually mad. And no one's allowed to tell him that. You know what they joke about at the Daily Mail? They joke about the fact that his shoe leather never wears out. Because all he ever does, the only little bit of hard floor that he walks upon is the tiny bit of pavement in Kensington that he steps on as he gets out of his chauffeur-driven limousine into the executive lift at the Daily Mail. Everything else, everywhere else he goes is carpeted. His gentlemen's clubs, his shooting estate in Scotland that received loads of subsidies from the European Union, his other home in Kensington in a lovely little mews. I think he's got a place in Surrey as well. Everywhere he goes, chauffeur-driven. Everywhere he goes, tinted windows. And he writes articles about how politicians at the coalface trying to do what's right by this country are somehow out of touch with ordinary people. We can translate that now, can't we? What does out of touch with ordinary people mean in Dacreese? Not racist is the short answer. 10:41 is the time. Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, is at Millbank. Big day, lots going on. What's the latest?
Big day indeed. Gavin Williamson, the Chief Whip, gets the job as Defence Secretary, taking over from Michael Fallon. He was one of the few members of the old guard under David Cameron. He was the PPS to David Cameron, his bag carrier, who made it across to Theresa May's administration, being promoted to Chief Whip, a position he's held ever since. A safe pair of hands safer as they come, and he takes over at this department at this crucial time. He's state school educated in Raincliffe, born in Scarborough, father of two, aged 41. The most controversial he's ever been? He was reprimanded in October 2013 for being noisy in the House of Commons, James.
Goes with the territory for a Chief Whip. Remind me, is Chief Whip a cabinet level position, or is this reshuffle over now?
No, it is a cabinet level position, but there would need to be an appointment into his position now. So I'm just checking my emails as I'm speaking to you. No, we don't yet have the identity of who takes over from Mr. Williamson as Chief Whip. Well liked within the party, well respected within the party, and of course his appointment will be welcomed pretty much by everybody, James. But it'll be a big question now: who takes over as Chief Whip at this crucial time when Theresa May doesn't have a parliamentary majority in the House of Commons? Will it be? I mean, this is almost the more pressing question for Theresa May when it comes to the management of her party. Will it be a Brexiteer? Will it be a Remainer? Who will be there to keep the troops in order going into the crucial votes on Brexit?
Well, will it be a liar or will it be someone who's got a relationship with the truth? The early indications will be that she'll probably plump for the former. Talk to me briefly, if you would, about that Lisa Nandy intervention in the House a couple of days ago, because essentially what Theresa May appears to have done is to plug a hole caused by a sex scandal with a man who stands accused of using information regarding sex scandals to exercise leverage upon other MPs, something you explained brilliantly yesterday.
Lisa Nandy in the House of Commons yesterday at Prime Minister's questions, it was, as I said, it was the last question. She stood up and she said that back in 2014, at the height of the Westminster paedophile scandal, she had raised with Theresa May, who was then Home Secretary, on 3 separate occasions, one of which was in the House of Commons, the fact that Lord Fortescue, Tim Fortescue, who was Chief Whip during the 1970s, early 1970s, when there was a very, very slim majority, had talked about and admitted that the Whip's office used information, withheld information to keep the troops in order. This was actually, I had a phone call from Downing Street afterwards, insisting, after that Prime Minister's questions, insisting that of course, Lisa Nandy was replying to a historic event, James. But interestingly, the Prime Minister's former Director of Communications...
Craig Oliver.
Katy Perrier.
Oh, yes.
On this occasion. So this was under Theresa May, admitted on BBC Breakfast on Tuesday morning that the Whips withheld information that might be useful to keep people in line on, as I say, on national television.
And Theresa May reportedly receives regular updates on the peccadillos and indiscretions of Conservative MPs.
But I should stress what Katy Perrier said in that interview. She said that the information was withheld. The really sensitive information was withheld. But you're quite right to pick up on this, James, because there is big questions, and we're expecting of course, the briefing with the Prime Minister's spokesman has been put back as a result of this announcement. But exactly what information the Prime Minister's being told, because the little black book that exists within the Whip's office, that this list of 40 names has supposedly come from, should never actually leave the Whip's office. And of course, Theresa May isn't allowed into the Whip's office. So there is a question about whether Theresa May has received regular updates. Of course, I should say, in reply to Lisa Nandy's question, she said that if the Whips have any information relating to a sexual assault, then that information shouldn't just simply be held on file. It should be handed to the police.
Although you lead us to the perhaps uncharitable observation, Theo Usherwood, that the man most likely to be in possession of the most damaging information regarding members of the Cabinet has just been given the promotion of his life.
Yes, he has. Yes.
Let's leave it there.
Yeah, okay.
It's 10:46. Great work, Theo Usherwood.
I'll give you the update when I have it on who gets that job.
Thank you. And if we had to distill down the discoveries of the morning, they would sound something like this. We are not receiving the information that we as citizens need to understand what is happening to our country, because that information is being deliberately and cynically withheld by the people in charge of our country, the government and the Fourth Estate in the media. The members thereof that encouraged us to vote to leave the European Union are desperate to keep from us predictions and reports and realities created by that referendum result. So, think about that for a minute. Imagine it was some tin pot republic in the middle of nowhere, where the people were not being told the truth by the government. 58 economic impact assessment reports. David Davis suggests, oh no, we can't publish them because it would weaken our negotiating position. Can't explain how or why. And even if he could, how can you take a word that David Davis so seriously, given that he was under the impression, while actually appointed as Secretary of State for leaving the European Union, that he could undertake trade negotiations with European Union member countries individually? Liam Fox, Boris Johnson, David Davis, all displayed an almost abject ignorance of the most basic rules of European Union law. It's quite incredible. It's no big surprise that some of the other Muppets do, but those three. Redwood yesterday, standing up. John Redwood, a fellow of All Souls College and supposedly the intellectual wing of the Brexit movement, standing up in the House of Commons and claiming not to understand what queues at Dover would mean. So if we leave the customs union, Dover essentially becomes a corked bottle. And you will be able to take the cork off momentarily and let through a cup. Every single truck, every single container, every single van, every single export going out of this country at Dover will take considerably longer than it does now. John Redwood in the House of Commons claiming not to understand what that means. Does it mean that lorries will be queuing in the sea? So what do we do? How do we break this deadlock where the people in charge of information won't let us see it because it would prove what a bunch of lying charlatans, or perhaps, to be charitable, incompetent ignoramuses that they have been? The people in charge of the flow of information will not let you see it because if you did see it, you'd know that they'd conned you. That is the definition of a country in crisis. And I don't just mean the 58 economic impact reports. I mean the way the newspapers choose what to put on the front page. Deputy President of the NFU warning that fruit and vegetables are already rotting in fields. National Nursing and Midwifery Council warning that there's been an 89% drop in applications from EU countries by nurses, qualified nurses, to bolster our depleted NHS, our understaffed NHS. And just to put the cherry on the icing upon that particularly unpleasant cake, the number of British nurses leaving has gone up by 11% as well. But hey, everybody relax. Actually, stop relaxing now. It's time to get serious. Not angry, just serious. How do we do? What do we do? How do we break this deadlock? If the people in charge won't give us the information that we need, and the people who like being lied to constantly shout down those of us who demand scrutiny and truth, what happens next? Rax is in Surbiton. Rax, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. For me, I think that the whole Fourth Estate is kind of in a real crisis. I kind of work in PR and social media, and you know, over the last few years, it's undeniable that the big brands behind media are panicking. They rely on this kind of clickbait culture of ad revenue that, so you look at the Daily Mail and you find stories on there that inherently contradict each other because they need to kind of appear in Google News or in people's feeds.
You also, even on a non kind of operational level, you have the editor of the Daily Mail writing an article in which he attempted to separate himself from the Mail Online, of which he's editor-in-chief and which his bonus is linked to the performance of. So the contempt in which you hold your readers when you can write op-eds like that, lying through your teeth to them, secure in the knowledge that if you throw them enough what you call clickbait, the traditional equivalent of clickbait would be throwing them a bone to gnaw on while you get on with the business of abusing them, because that is what all the race hate and all the Islamophobia and all the rhetoric about the unemployed or about food banks, that's what all of that is designed to do. Here's somebody that you can hate, and while you're busy hating on them, I'm going to pick your pocket.
But I think there's this kind of dualism going on right now where I think, I can't remember the last time I actually purchased a newspaper. It must have been last.
But it doesn't matter because the agenda is set. So you don't have to buy a newspaper. You're going, as you say, on your Facebook page, and they're sharing the stories that come from once reputable news sources like the Mail or the Telegraph, no longer reputable. It's not just Wikipedia that considers the Daily Mail to be beyond description as a proper news provider. But you're getting it from your weird, completely bogus and corrupt sites as well. These often Russian-sponsored far-right sites. You've got your Breitbart, for example, which I've had a bit of a crash course in over the course of the last 7 or 8 months, and they are literally just pumping out stuff that endorses prejudice, fosters hate, and encourages racism.
But I think that, journalism, I think, you've got journalism with a small J and journalism with a big J. And I think, the profession, the actual, paid journalists who have traditionally gone with facts and figures, that's in massive decline.
But why have I got over 1 million listeners then?
I think we're self-selecting as consumers of news, our channels, and that's always been the case.
But as an economic model that essentially deals in evidence, statistics and facts, tells the truth, mixed up with a bit of jokes and the occasional explosive rhetoric, that works. That sells adverts. I've got over 1 million listeners.
And I think on radio and TV, that can still kind of continue to evolve. But I think the newspapers, in the traditional sense, the print media, are now absolutely relying on online traffic. So for me, I get my news because I self-select the topics that are relevant.
Creeps through. So what are we going to do then?
Well, I think social media has been kind of put up there as kind of ruining or being the culprit here. But I think there's an optimism that needs to be told, and an optimistic story of social media, because there is this echo chamber. When Brexit happened, I didn't see it coming, as did lots of people like yourself.
I did.
Oh, you did. Sorry, that was one of your predictions, wasn't it?
Yes.
But for me, I was absolutely left the day after Brexit, just in absolute shock.
And then you're described as being out of touch or not understanding people, and then you try and get in touch and you try to understand these people, and they don't have rational arguments to offer you. They just echo and parrot the kind of people who are now trying to stop them from seeing the truth and seeing the news. It's a perfectly symmetrical con.
But James, you're talking about people being lied to, and I can go along with that. But I think we're living in an age now where a Google search, if you dig deep enough, and don't dig that deep, will give you both sides of the argument. It will give you, the Guardian.
But it won't, will it? Because what you have with that example from the Daily Mail, it's in Private Eye this week, when the same organisation that said Brexit is going to be like the Blitz said that John McDonnell's economic proposals were rubbish. The Daily Mail described the same organisation as a paragon of fiscal virtue in one context and an absolute disastrous disgrace in the other context. So how do you get two sides of that story?
Because I think people like yourself, people like...
It's not enough.
Russell, it's not, but I think that they're going through a moment right now where
the people who are being lied to. Well, yeah, but are they? How are they going to be found out if they're suppressing the impact assessment reports and calling for saboteurs to be crushed, enemies of the people to be attacked, journalists to be silenced, and even academics to surrender the conclusions that they've arrived? I mean, that's the beauty of the academic thing that happened last week while I was away. You have effectively now got journalists and tin pot politicians calling for professionals who've spent their entire lives studying subjects to stay silent about the conclusions that they've drawn. Why on earth should academics be in favour of the European Union and think that Brexit is a bad idea? Because they've spent their entire lives studying the trading agreement, studying the law, studying the history, studying the facts. They've spent their entire lives studying this stuff, and they've arrived at a very broad consensus. It won't be unanimous, but it will be a very broad consensus that the people who told you to vote to leave the European Union have done you a grim and grave disservice. And that's the opinion of the academic establishment. Their qualification, decades of study. The reaction of the people who told you to do this terrible, terrible thing? Oh, we must silence them. Silence the professors, just like they've sought to silence the judges, silence the politicians, and silence the journalists. This isn't democracy, people. Rav writes, doesn't history reveal what we are going to do next? When issues actually threaten livelihoods or loved ones, people react. Poll tax riots, fuel protests, etc., etc. That's the question I'm asking you now. What's going to happen next? And this is a situation caused by the very deliberate, I mean, almost unthinkingly cynical attempts by people in power, in government and in the media, to stop information reaching the rest of us about what Brexit will mean. 58 individual assessment reports commissioned by government into what leaving the single market, which they all told us we wouldn't have to do. I think mostly because they were too dumb to understand, actually, not because they were lying. When you hear them saying, no, absolutely nobody is talking about leaving the single market. When you heard them saying, well, no, we're not going to leave the customs union. I don't think they were lying. I think they just didn't understand stuff. In the same way that Donald Trump had to have it explained to him by Angela Merkel 13 times that he couldn't do a trade deal with Germany, he could only do a trade deal with the whole of the European Union, at which point he said, well, crikey, let's do that then, and prioritised it above doing a trade deal with us. It's not necessarily fair to always accuse these people of dishonesty. Sometimes it's just incompetence, and incompetence born of a kind of ideological blinkeredness. So They are now stopping us from knowing stuff. They are not going to report the food rotting in fields in anything like the way that they would if it could be blamed upon Brussels or Muslims. Okay? That's the most fundamental truth of British journalism at the moment. If they can't blame it on Brussels or Muslims, they won't report it on anything like the level or the scale that they would if they could. Okay? We can all agree on that, can't we? Good. So they're now keeping the information from us at a governmental level. It took a Labour intervention yesterday to kind of force the hand of the government to publish these reports. We don't know yet what form that publication will take. But at a media level, stories about nurses hemorrhaging out of the NHS, a 90% fall in the number applying from European Union countries. We haven't even bothered looking up the hospitality or the catering industries yet. These are not stories that can be blamed on anybody other than those who told you to vote Brexit. So why on earth would a newspaper editor who told you to vote Brexit be reporting on the facts that make it look like a disastrous decision? So what do we do? What do ordinary people do now to get access to truth? Given that we also know the election watchdog has begun an inquiry into whether Russia interfered in the Brexit referendum campaign. Now, if you've been kind enough to listen to this programme over the last few years, this won't have come as a surprise to you. Because about 5 years ago, we met a man called Bill Browder, who Vladimir Putin last week put back on the Russian sort of input to the Interpol wanted list, trying to get Bill Browder arrested if he tries, for example, to go to America. And what Bill explained to us, having seen his lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, essentially murdered by the Kremlin for having the audacity to unveil a massive tax fraud, what Bill explained to us 5 years ago on this programme was that Vladimir Putin has one fear and one priority. He fears ending up like the Ukrainian leader who got kicked into touch when the public discovered just how much he'd stolen from the country. That's his fear. And his priority is stopping the Russian people from finding out just how much he's stolen from the country. We're talking about a figure in excess of $100 billion, according to the most informed accounts. So how does Putin stop his own people from essentially turning on him? Answer, sow instability everywhere else. And then they can't turn around and say, we want to be more like the West. We want to have transparency. We want to have a free media. We want to have proper democracy. Putin's worst nightmare. How does he avoid that nightmare? Make the West look like a mess. How do you do that? You employ troll armies. Absolutely hundreds of thousands of accounts on Twitter and Facebook. Some of them provenly paid for. The FBI have already got the evidence they need to show the money trail back to Russia, to subvert democracy, to subvert freedom, and most of all to undermine traditional journalism. One of these outfits even tried to sue me last year. I'll tell you that story when I've cleared it with the lawyers. That's the full and frank ambition of Putin. I don't understand the fellow travellers in America and Britain who've gone along with it, except for the fact that they've been given free rein for their own kind of ignorant racism for the first time in 20 years. But instability, so look at it. What have we got with Donald Trump talking about fake news? Well, you can't trust the newspapers anymore, the proper ones. American newspapers, much better than British newspapers when it comes to objectivity and truth. You've got a president of America who says you can't trust the New York Times, but you can trust Fox News. Just think about that for a minute. How does that suit Vladimir Putin? Well, Vladimir Putin controls all of the news flow in Russia, something that Donald Trump at this point in his presidency can only dream of. So you've subverted that. Then you get down to democracy. How do you break up democracy? Sow division among countries. That's why Russia got stuck in on the Catalonia question. Russia got stuck in on Brexit, because a stable Europe is a united Europe, and an unstable Europe is brilliant for Vladimir Putin. They've even put money into this ludicrous idea that California should seek independence from the rest of the United States. And today we read that the Russians have parked their tanks on the Scottish nationalist lawn, keen to encourage calls there for another referendum. Because a fractured Europe is essentially a fractured NATO, and a fractured NATO is a resurgent Russia. It's not difficult. It's really straightforward if you get the information. So what are we going to do about the fact that they're trying to stop us getting the information? Phone lines are full, but I'm not sure why. I haven't really asked you a question yet. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need if you want to interrupt me, and frankly, somebody should. Paul's in York. Paul, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Paul.
Well, we don't rely on the news anymore. We rely on our eyes and experience. You talk about agriculture. Well, a lot of jobs were lost in York because British Sugar, at the behest of the EU, closed down in York. Now, everybody knew what was going on. and it was sacrificed so that the biggest sugar producing country, France, could maintain its position. Then, of course, you've got Terriers of York. Again, it moved to Poland, lock, stock and barrel with all the machines. People in York knew all about it. Why it was never, ever reported by people like yourselves, God only knows.
So I remember talking about the Terriers of York factory move and the Cadbury one as well when they were taken over by Kraft. The sugar one is a little bit different because it hinges upon the distinction between cane sugar production and beet sugar production, and it's why Tate and Lyle were one of the key funders of Brexit. So, I mean, you're not arguing with me today. You're arguing with the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union and saying that she doesn't understand farming.
Well,
which you're perfectly entitled to do, Paul, and it kind of goes with the zeitgeist, but I just wonder what your qualifications are.
Contract packer.
Okay, versus the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union.
Well, if the first name begins with R, I know her anyway. And when we were talking to her about...
Her name is Minette Batters.
No, not the one. It's the North Yorkshire lady.
No, this is the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union. See, this is what happens when you rely on your eyes and ears to get the facts rather than the news. You end up talking nonsense about people that you've got completely wrong.
Okay, then tell me about this one then. Have you looked at a Ford Transit van lately? They're manufactured. This affected people down in your area, so you probably know where they closed the Dagenham plant, engine plant, for 2,000 jobs, and the Southampton Transit van production line in Southampton.
Ford is of course an American company that will be keen to sell into the European market, and its ability to do so is going to be hugely compromised. What are the tariffs again on cars if we want to export them into the European Union under World Trade Organization rules, Paul?
Well, what about the cars that's coming from Japan? Some lovely ones coming from there. We don't have to pay 10 and 20% on them.
We would. World Trade Organization tariffs, we would. But you didn't talk about Japan. You were talking about Ford Transit. So if we want to export them, from this country to the European Union, Paul, what would the tariff be under WTO rules?
You can't export them because we don't make them in this country anymore.
What would the tariff be under WTO rules if we were trying to persuade Ford to start manufacturing them in Luton again?
Ford Transit, Ford company, they moved it lock, stock and barrel to Turkey with a preferential EU loan.
Turkey's not in the EU.
Yeah, but everybody's listening. Look up Ford Transit motor vehicles, and all the jobs went, and that's why everybody voted who's in manufacturing, who knows a little bit, and experiencing all these job losses, voted for Brexit.
So why is unemployment then at an all-time low?
Where is it an all-time low?
In the United Kingdom.
Because we all self-employed sole traders, we kind of get round all...
Are you a self-employed sole trader when you're packing?
Oh, yeah.
So you don't have any union protection, you don't have any workers' rights, you don't have any ability to protect your own interests from an unscrupulous employer?
Well, what about...
Because you're going to have even less after Brexit.
Well, Rosemary O'Grady, for instance. Rosemary O'Grady, the union person. Her dad was at Cowley. Cowley. So, don't talk me about union and protection jobs. She was the one that went over to Cuba to sort out a deal with the Cubans.
Just pause for a minute. When you rang in today and you thought, I'll show him about why Brexit's going to be great for British workers, did you sort of think to yourself, if I end up talking about somebody called Rosemary going to Cuba, it's probably the point at which I should hang up and say thank you and goodbye? Or are you thinking, I'm really nailing this now, I'm on fire?
No, actually, I'm laying a patio.
Is that a figure of speech, Paul?
No, I'm not doing that.
Okay, so when you're here to talk about the fruit and vegetable rotting in the fields of Britain and the 90% drop in the number of European Union nurses applying to this country, and you find yourself talking about someone called Rosemary whose dad worked at Cowley and once went to Cuba, is there a little voice anywhere in your head that goes, this isn't going well?
No, Francis O'Grady, dad, worked at Cowley.
So who's Rosemary O'Grady then?
Oh, no, forget it. Forget Rosemary. I don't know where you got that one from.
Okay, so, well, I got it from you. It's what came out of your mouth.
All right.
So
Anyway.
is that little voice yet saying this isn't really going very well? Maybe the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union knows more about farming than I do, and maybe, just maybe, the Nursing and Midwifery Council knows more about nursing and midwifery? Or are you still thinking, we don't need the news, I'll rely on my senses, I'll rely on my eyes and ears, and then something about sugar?
Yeah. Well, you could say that, but she never turned up when British Sugar were closing down and all the farmers were struggling because of the root
mate.
vegetables.
Okay. What are you most looking forward to after getting out of the European Union?
Me?
Yeah.
I think I'm probably going back to Incoterms exporting.
Say that again?
Incoterms. A long time ago, I used to do quarantine. Vehicle and trailers and containers used to come in. And I was involved with the quarantine of trailers until customs cleared them. Now, one of the things I don't understand is the amount of stuff that goes abroad. You say it's 40% of trade is with Europe. But if something leaves Felixstowe and goes to Zeebrugge, do the Europeans count that as our imports going into Zeebrugge before?
You're asking a journalist,
Go on.
Paul. You're supposed to rely upon your eyes and your ears and your own senses, remember?
Well, in that case, I'd suggest that some of those exports are counted twice.
Okay, mate. So, just briefly, when we leave, your life is going to be better because...
Well, because I won't be under the yoke of nitwits who are in Europe.
Okay, well, just what does that mean in real terms? Actual measurable improvement? Something that you could point out and say, ha-ha, I wouldn't have had that last year.
Well, let's look at, for instance,
No,
Sweden.
let's not. Let's look at Paul.
All right. Right. Well, in that case, I'll be able to
Go on.
trade a lot easier.
You think
I won't
you'll be
have-
able to trade a lot easier with whom?
with the food, for contract packing food.
Contract packing food. You'll be able to trade a lot easier as we come out of the largest free trade area in the world.
With
which
regard
has
to
in place
far right,
already
or
56
totalitarian
separate free trade agreements with other territories and countries, and by leaving that, you're going to be able to do more trade.
Yeah. Well, why
Okay,
not?
just talk me through how. Where are you going to sell to that you can't sell to now?
Well, if cane sugar comes in at the moment, then there's a...
I'm talking about you
WTO.
right now. Who are you going to be able to sell to tomorrow after leaving that you can't sell to yesterday?
Whoever customers come along, I'm going to adjust...
And the
new
law
market.
governing trade agreements, how's your relationship with that going to change when you haven't got one?
Well, I didn't have a business when British Sugar shut down in
I'm
York,
not
did
going
I?
to get...
So-
I mean, you sugar and spice and all things nice, Paul. Yeah, you keep laughing, mate. 18 minutes after 11. Theo Usherwood, our political editor, is here with some more details of this what do you call a very, very tiny reshuffle, Theo?
It's a precision-guided reshuffle.
Is it?
Yes. Julian Smith takes over as Chief Whip. He is the MP for Skipton and Ripon. He's been in Parliament since May 2010. He still is a Remainer. Well, he voted Remain in the 2016 election. Known as Mr. Darcy amongst MPs for his likeness to Colin Firth.
Really?
Yes, apparently so.
Have you seen him? Is this likeness real?
Well, it's quite interesting, actually. Most people missed him walking into number 10.
Can't look that
because
much
he's not-
like Colin Firth.
but seen as a rather sinister character within Parliament, quite known as being quite abrupt, made a name for himself at the height of the Edward Snowden leaks to The Guardian when he stood up in Parliament and said that The Guardian was compromising British intelligence and he was going to report the newspaper to the police,
Okay.
which he did. And his position, of course, he's been bumped up to Chief Whip. His position has been taken over by Esther McVeigh, the MP
Who
for
many of us
Tatton.
didn't really notice had got back into Parliament at the last election in the seat that George Osborne vacated.
She took Tatton. Interestingly, a couple of people I've been in touch with since we last spoke, James, she's been subject to horrific abuse, both when she lost her seat back in 2015 in Liverpool and then when she fought George Osborne's seat. And I'm told that she's going to be heading up the People Management Review as Deputy Chief Whip. Very likely that she'll do that because, of course, she's got her own personal experience of what it's like to face
Very, very misogynistic and vile abuse from Labour activists.
Exactly. So that's
Something Laura Kunsberg also knows a thing or two about.
Absolutely. But the only other thing I was going to say was that I'm still unclear as to whether the tarantula Cronus, who frequented the Whip's office, is moving with his old boss to Gavin Williamson to the Ministry of Defence, or whether he will stay there to be used to threaten any MPs who don't fall into line. There is a bit of unease, though, about Mr. Williamson's appointment. The feeling that he somehow has simply appointed himself. Sarah Wollaston, the serial rebel MP, the GP from Totnes, has tweeted.
But again, I think you and I need to have a chat about language. Because, you say serial rebel, but actually she votes with her conscience every single time, which is what the constituency elected her to do.
Okay, she's a rebel against the Tory whips.
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Sorry.
No, it's not. I'm not picking a hole in you. We're having a bit of a crisis on the programme today with regard to the whole state of British journalism, and we've decided that it's not all your fault.
Start with me.
Little acorns, Theo. Little acorns.
Take down.
But you're right. She does defy the whip on a regular basis. Because, for example, on NHS stuff, the fact that she's a trained GP probably informs her opinion more than Jeremy Hunt does.
Yes, and she's just put out a tweet that many feel in the party might reflect the mood about Mr. Williamson's appointment. There are times when offered a job that it would be better to advise that another would be more experienced and suited to the role.
So strong and stable, if nothing else.
Yes, this is the reshuffle of sorts done and dusted. Theresa May wanted to keep it limited because, of course, we're only 3 weeks from a budget. She doesn't have the authority or power to make any sweeping changes, and so small incremental changes that do not rock the proverbial boat have been necessary.
And is that it now?
Yep, that's it. Done.
OK. What's the next big crisis on the horizon? Are we going to see any of these impact assessment reports that they were adamant we couldn't see at 6 o'clock yesterday, but said maybe we could at 8 o'clock, and then at 10 o'clock suggested that we might be able to see bits of them, strong and stable?
I think we're going to see something. We're going to see something in the immediate future, but of course it depends what pieces of information are redacted. I have pointed you towards, there was a very interesting contribution from the Conservative MP for Broxtowe, Anna Soubry in the House of Commons.
Well, she's not a serial rebel, actually, but she is increasingly speaking her mind and coming close to putting actions where words currently are.
And I'm sure we'll be able to find that. But
you've won. You're in charge of this now. You have to face up to the responsibility of delivering a Brexit that works for everybody in this country and for generations to come. I rather take the view that there might be stuff in these huge impact assessments which perhaps honourable members on this side don't want to put out into the public domain. That one. Yeah. Why wouldn't they want to put stuff out into the public domain?
Because it undermines the argument, and according to the government, of course, that when you go into the negotiations, if you are presenting a front where you say, well, actually our own impact assessments show that it won't all be great and wonderful and fantastic, then it would undermine our negotiating position.
Yeah, but if it was all great, it'd be brilliant, because we could say, look, we've done an impact assessment. If we leave the single market and the customs union, then we're going to have sugar plants in York and transit vans in Luton, and everything's going to be brilliant. Here's the proof. Impact assessment report. Ha-ha! EU, stick that in your pipe and smoke it. What are you going to give us now, eh? That would be good.
Those impact assessment reports, James, are just not on message. They've been drawn up by civil servants.
Oh, I see. So civil servants, of course, would have been operating in an objective universe, focusing upon evidence and expertise.
No. They're mandarins who've run away with themselves and got completely out of control and have written something that's way beyond their brief, and they have no idea what they're doing.
So they're Ramona saboteurs who must be crushed.
Yeah.
But who commissioned them to do these reports?
The ministers.
David Davis?
Yeah.
OK.
Yeah.
But we can't see them?
No.
All right. Make sure you have a nice lunch, Theo. It's going to be one of those weeks. 28 minutes after 11 is the time, and it is one of those news scenarios that will almost certainly merit the postponement of Mystery Hour. Interest rate rises on the way at 12. And again, I stress this. I cannot stress this enough. Thank you for all the compliments that you've sent in with regard to my patience with Paul. It's easy. I got angry a lot with callers previously, but I'm not angry anymore, because it's like getting angry with somebody who's had their pocket picked, or it's like getting angry with somebody who has been brainwashed into a cult. It's like getting angry with somebody who's got an addiction. They can't help it. And the effort that's been put into putting them into this position is immense. It's epic. The editorial floor of the Daily Mail are dedicated daily to making Paul Dacre's mad fantasies look a little bit like a reality. And of course, when you've got that amount of money to spend, you've got a Viscount who owns a newspaper that rails against elites. What's his name? The sketch, right? Quentin Lett's written a book about elites and how awful elites are. It's got Lily Allen in it, but not Viscount Rothermere. So when that level of effort is being put into gulling people, you can't get cross with people for being gulled. You can just sit there like the wife of or the husband of an addict and an alcoholic and pray that they're going to hit rock bottom soon, because until they hit rock bottom, they can't go into recovery. And if they're not getting the information they need to register the fact that they perhaps already have hit rock bottom, then what can the rest of us do? If they won't let us see the reports, if they won't publish the news that's true, if they won't publish anything unless they can blame it all on Brussels or Muslims, how are the rest of us supposed to keep the light burning? 0345 6060 973. I suppose one way you keep the light on is when you speak to people who claim they don't need news anymore, they can rely on their eyes and ears and senses to work out what's going on, is you ignore them and you keep giving them news. So with reference to that claim from an earlier caller about Ford, and you could almost have predicted that Daniel Hannan would be involved in this. Here you go. This is from InFacts, which is fact-checking organisation. A related claim by the pro-Brexit Euro MP Daniel Hannan that the EU gave Ford a grant to relocate from Southampton to Turkey is tendentious. In 2012, Ford did receive a loan from the European Investment Bank, an EU institution, of around £150 million for a factory in Turkey. The loan was not to relocate, as Hannan says, though it occurred around the same time as Ford chose to close its factory in Southampton. As such, the loan stirred controversy in local newspapers, needless to say. If you can't blame it on Brussels or Muslims, it wouldn't get reported at all, but you could blame this on Brussels, so it got reported. But it should be put in context of EIB lending in Britain, which was worth around £6 billion last year. So that great reason for leaving the European Union, because an EU institution gave a loan of 150 million quid to Ford around the time they closed a factory in Southampton and opened one in Turkey. The same institution loaned 6 billion quid last year to Britain. So EIB loans fund, for example, projects like Crossrail, the Midlands Metropolitan Hospital in Birmingham, and the bank also lent Ford £450 million in 2010 to develop a new generation of greener vehicles in the UK. So your man who relies upon his eyes and ears and his senses to find out what's going on thinks that it's a good idea to leave the European Union because the European Investment Bank gave £150 million to Ford to build a factory in Turkey. He doesn't know, because he relies upon his eyes and ears and his senses instead upon news and journalism, that the same European Union institution not only lent £6 billion in Britain last year, but also lent 3 times what it lent to Ford to open a factory in Turkey, to Ford to develop greener vehicles in the UK. Facts. And that's why they hate them. That's why. They rely on people like Paul to repeat this nonsense, not knowing that it's nonsense, not a bad man, not a dishonest man, not a stupid man, but a man who presumes that if an MEP has said something in public, then it must at least hold a patina of truth. It must at least have some semblance of reality behind it. And when the newspapers collude to keep the truth from these people and champion the politicians who perpetrate the lies, the rest of us are rendered mushrooms. We are kept in the dark and occasionally showered in the stuff that they shower mushrooms in regularly in the dark. It's not hard to find this stuff, but you've got to look for it. And the more you look for it, the more confusing things become. And if certainty seduces you, don't look for evidence or information. Just double down on your certainty. We'll get our country back, taking back control, whatever the hell that is supposed to mean, by being banned and prevented from seeing the impact assessment reports commissioned by the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union in order to establish precisely what the truth is behind all the claims that men like him made. The claims that things would be easy, the claims that deals would be done, the claims that tariff-free access would be the simplest thing in the world to establish, while simultaneously withdrawing from freedom of movement. All of these claims got published. They didn't damage our negotiating position, but the actual facts established by the civil servants in these departments, no, we can't see them. We can see the claims, but we can't see the research. We can see the lies, but we can't see the truth. and the most powerful journalists in the country, not just waving it through, actively colluding in the process of corrupting the British public. Which is why you can't get cross with people like Paul. Or even the people online who are vile and horrible, and you can't tell the difference between some stupid British racist and some very carefully constructed Russian troll account. You can't tell the difference. But don't get cross with them either. Because they're like addicts. And they can't help it. And what are they addicted to? False certainty. They're addicted to the ludicrous notion that there are simple answers to complicated questions. And they're also addicted to the idea that their whole lives are somebody else's fault. And it's not because they're inadequate or weak. It's because that's what they've been told by men like Paul Dacre, railing against the elites while running a shooting estate in Scotland and working for an actual Viscount. By men like Farage, railing against the elites while trousering money from the owners of the actual Ritz Hotel to write nonsense in a newspaper that was once reputable. Don't blame the people that fall for this stuff. Because if the amount of effort was put into getting the truth out there that's been put into getting the lies out there, the result of the referendum would have been 80-20 the other way round. Didn't even know that, did you? You'd read the stuff about the Luton Transit. You'd heard Daniel Hannan talking about it. You didn't know that they'd lent 3 times that amount to Ford in Britain to develop new vehicles. Of course you didn't, because you couldn't blame that on Brussels or Muslims. Why would that have made the newspapers? What's that? The European Investment Bank puts £6 billion a year into this country to help develop things like HS2 and hospitals in Birmingham. My God, I never saw that in the news. Why not? Answer in the introduction to this programme an hour and 40 minutes ago. If you can't blame it on Brussels or Muslims, a certain type of journalist, a certain type of broadcaster, a certain type of editor in this country at this point in time doesn't think it's worth publishing at all. Which is how you had to tune into me today to find out that the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union said in a speech in Norfolk yesterday that food is rotting in the fields because of seasonal labour shortages. Who's going to do that? Who's going to go and pick the turnips? I'm not. Omar's in Derby. Do you fancy it, Omar?
No, not at all, mate. No, not at all.
Oh, sorry to hear that. What's going on, and how do we keep the lights on as the effort to turn them off reaches almost fever pitch in some corners of this industry?
I couldn't tell you, James. I think you're doing a very good job.
Tiny, mate.
Trying to, but I think you're people like you are few and far between. Firstly, I wanted to say that I think you're a legend, truthfully, for doing what you're doing.
You're very kind, but let's talk about the disaster facing the country rather than how wonderful I am.
I think, people are capable of critical thinking, though, and I think, I think what resonated with your whole conversation was something I listened to that George Carlin had said. I don't know if you know George Carlin.
Yes.
The speaker, yeah. But basically, it was just, how they want obedient workers, sort of just smart enough to run the machines, answer the phones, but yet, not dumb enough, but, stupid enough to sort of... Supine
and complacent enough to just carry on putting the pennies in the slots without asking why they don't have more.
Exactly, and I just think we have this whole... this is just what society has become, basically, and we as people, we're sort of, we've got this culture of being selfish and ignorant as citizens, and that's the kind of people who we've elected as politicians, and it just, it's a worrying time, really, and I like yourself, I don't know how to go around convincing people.
You can't convince people any more than you can convince them to stop putting their money into fixed odds betting terminals or to stop drinking. Something has to happen. No. They have to. The phrase for addicts is they have to reach rock bottom before they seek help with recovery. But the problem is that they take us all with them to rock bottom.
Yeah.
And we don't know what rock bottom is. It should be food is already rotting in the fields. It should be there's been a drop of 90% in the number of EU nationals applying to become nurses here. It should be 3.2 million people have been told, which nobody predicted or warned against, that they're not at home here anymore. They're merely seeking to be permitted to stay. All of these things should have represented rock bottom, but they don't. So what does? You've got people telling opinion pollsters they'll be happy to see their children lose their jobs as long as we still leave. What the hell is rock bottom going to be for somebody like that, Omar?
No, I couldn't tell you, but how do we rock the boat? How do you rock the boat? I just don't know. But yeah, I just wanted to say that basically. And
Bless you, mate. Mind how you go.
A great job.
Well, I do my little bit. It really is. And if you're kind enough to listen, then it might seem like a lot, but in the great scheme of things, it really is. And the only time you begin to wonder whether you are just beginning to make a difference is when people like Kelvin MacKenzie and Paul Dacre publish pieces in their newspapers calling for you to be sacked. Oh, and they both have. It's 11:45. We're all going to feel a little bit silly if interest rates don't go up. The received wisdom and indeed the expert prediction is, of course, that it will rise slightly as a corrective to rocketing inflation. I'm no expert, although, frankly, I suppose if you vote to leave the European Union, that qualifies me to advise you on economics, given that it was that side of the argument that decided we'd had enough of experts. But I presume the pound's going to suffer a little bit, at least in the short term, as a result of any interest rate rise, because it makes borrowing more expensive. I don't know, but we'll speak to someone who does imminently. That number is due to drop at 12 noon, and following that, we'll talk a little more about what interest rate rises will mean for the country at large. And then I'm minded at 12:30 to hear live from Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, and the man who, in an ideal universe, his track record, his proven expertise, and his sort of undiluted intelligence really would have rendered him the most powerful man in the country. Do you remember in the hours immediately after the referendum result came in, and everyone could agree that nobody knew what was going to happen next, and the only time at which it felt like there were any grown-ups in the room was when Mark Carney started speaking. Didn't take long, of course, for the whole kind of Project Fear and Ramona rhetoric to replace that, but he was clearly a grown-up, and almost every single thing he said has subsequently come true. That's why I want to listen to what he's got to say about inflation and interest rate rises, and of course the necessity that Brexit has brought to bear upon both of those issues. So your pound in your pocket is currently worth a lot less than it was before you voted to leave the European Union, and the food and everything else that you go out to buy with that pound that's worth less than it was now costs more. But taking back control. And the likelihood is that things will be considerably worse in the future, but you're not allowed to know that because the 58 impact assessment reports commissioned by the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union, he's decided that you're too thick to understand them, or that if you did see them, it would somehow undermine his negotiating position, but he's been unable to explain precisely how or why. It's almost as if, when we talk about what the role of journalism is in the context of this current crisis, that, of course, the people who've created it insist isn't a crisis. It's almost as if is he the political editor of Channel 4, I think, Gary Gibbon, who published a brilliant blog. He published a book called Breaking Point, and this is the entry. It was published a year ago today, which is why it's popped up in my feed. This is his entry for the 14th of July, 2016, so just over a fortnight after the result came in. Earlier in Parliament, one pro-Leave Tory who worked closely with Michael Gove and the whole Vote Leave team said, "We weren't meant to win. That line, you were only meant to blow the bloody doors off, it's true. The plan was to run the Remain side close enough to scare the EU into bigger concessions. None of us thought we were ever going to win, with the possible exception of Dominic Cummings, who just wanted to drive a car into the Camerons' living room. It's all such a mess. I want a second referendum now." I remind you, a pro-Leave Tory who worked closely with Michael Gove. This was never, ever supposed to happen. Why did it happen? Because of manipulation and scaremongering and lies. These are not matters of opinion, these are matters of historical fact. They are matters of record. You knew things had gone beyond repair when people started claiming that the number on the side of the bus was just decoration rather than an attempt to persuade people to vote in a certain way. Do you remember that? That was quite early on afterwards, because that was the first lie that would be properly dismantled. Oh, well, I never said that. Oh, no one ever meant that. Oh, no, that was never the intention. As soon as that started happening, you began to think, crikey, the whole shebang's going to fall apart. But of course it can't fall apart while the people that have created the crisis are insisting that there is no crisis. 11:52 is the time. Mo is in Dublin. Hello, mate. It's been too long.
It has been too long. How are you doing?
Very well indeed. What's on your mind?
So you talked about kind of how you get different perspectives from the Daily Mail and the Archbreakfasters, and how perhaps the facts never actually get conveyed to the public. So to give you the perspective from here in Dublin, what we've been talking about in terms of Brexit and how we expect it to develop, you often hear about the argument being framed by like the Daily Mail and the Archbreakfasters that we should just leave, we don't need a transition period. and that we can go out there and,
This is the no deal, the hard Brexiters who we probably shouldn't be surprised given what's gone on recently, who are still taken seriously by some news outlets.
Yeah, and what doesn't ever get put into the public domain is how it's not actually in the interest of all the countries within the EU to offer a transition deal. The UK, as you often mention, is the slowest growing country in the OECD now, having been the top just over a year ago. But this is actually despite the UK having a huge advantage at the moment, which is that it's got all the benefits of being in the EU, but the pound has been devalued by 14%. So could you imagine if Tesco tomorrow, for example, everything that they had was 12% cheaper? Do you think Morrison's or Sainsbury's would be happy to extend that exact scenario out by 2 years, where everything is less competitive, everything is more expensive? It's going to cost the EU a lot of money to offer a transition deal, and they're painted by the British media as the evil, this big evil bureaucratic body, but actually they're offering an olive branch by even suggesting a transition period is possible.
Because it would be better for us than it would be a favour, in a sense. I mean, it's not entirely altruistic. They would rather have some sort of proper free trade agreement in place than nothing, for reasons that are fairly obvious. But in terms of utilitarianism, there is more benefit for us from the transition period than there is for them.
100%. Right. And actually, at the company that I work for, we had our annual conference a couple of weeks ago, and the Irish finance minister was there, and everyone is planning for the UK to leave on the basis of no deal now. No one's actually expecting there to be a decent deal done, and it's forecasted in the Irish finance minister that Ireland itself is going to not have 3% of its GDP completely knocked off by Brexit.
Actually, I've seen this on the impact assessments that the European Union has published, and I haven't quite got to the bottom of why I've been looking at impact assessments published by the European Union while hearing on the BBC that they haven't published any impact assessments. But Ireland is quite close to Britain when it comes to sustaining economic damage, and then the other 26 countries in the European Union, the graph plummets, doesn't it, in terms of the impact it's going to have on them. Ireland is so closely tied up with our economy that we've kind of voted to screw them as well.
80% of Irish trade goes into the UK, and it's going to hit the low to middle sized businesses and normal people here more than anyone else, rather than the big tech. So actually, once again, Ireland has become is going to bear the results of a UK decision.
Silver linings, Mo?
I haven't heard any since I've been here.
Oh, come on.
I'm being serious. A little silver lining about the interest rates today. Actually, it won't move the pound. It's been pretty much priced in for a month, so you won't see things get worse. And
I mean, historically, actually, I think I misspoke a moment ago. Historically, you might expect an interest rate rise to strengthen a currency, but given that this has already been priced in, it will probably stay about the same.
Yeah,
this is the field you work in, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, just qualifying that, because it's not the field I work in, so it's always like, you know me, mate, I've got this weird retrospective nostalgia for when we respected experts.
maybe it'll come back one day.
Ring me again soon on a funny day. I know you're working very hard, filling your pockets with billions and millions. And Mo, we knew Mo when he was a student in Skipton, ringing up to talk to us about his thesis and his undergraduate work. And now he's a high-flying financier based in the city of Dublin. Mo also was a young man who joined us to talk about the experience of his family in fleeing Iraq and describing the welcome that he'd been able to find in this country back in the day. 11:57 is the time. Speaking of experts, Kathleen Brooks is the research director at City Index, and she's going to hold my hand through the coverage of this expected interest rate rise, which means we should probably begin with the most obvious question, Kathleen, which is there any chance at all that they won't go up?
I think there is a slim to none. No, this is Mark Carney's credibility is on the line here. He's misled markets before, and actually, if he does it again, I think it could be the exit for him.
When you say misled, you mean he's hinted that he might do something and then subsequently hasn't, and this time the hints have been bigger and the expectation has grown accordingly?
That's exactly what I mean. I mean, look, he's not called the unreliable boyfriend for nothing. So, of course, there is a slight chance that he may not hike interest rates. But I think it would be a bad move career-wise for him if he doesn't today.
Why, regardless of who does it, why is it, or indeed is it, economically sensible to do this now? Why is it, or indeed necessary? So they currently stand at 0.25%. What do you think is the most likely figure they will stand at in a few minutes' time? And why would you argue that Mark Carney had little choice but to do this?
So it's a very small rate rise, only 25 basis points. So they go from 0.25 to 0.5. We're not expecting them to signal that they're going to continue hiking rates anytime soon, and rates are likely to stay at 0.5 for some time. But basically, the rates were cut in the immediate aftermath of the Brexit results last year. And since then, those doomsday economic scenarios, right now, they haven't materialised. And actually, a great surprise to the upside last quarter. So getting rid of that emergency cut is probably right to do it now. It's been in the market for, a whole year or over a year at this stage. And the economy's doing quite well. Inflation's also rising quite high. So I think this is just a reversal of an emergency cut rather than an actual rate hiking cycle that we're embarking on.
And what impact would it have upon inflation then?
Well, traditionally it should dampen inflation. We think that this rate hike on its own won't. We need a stronger power to dampen inflation, because the reason inflation is so high in the UK in the first place is because of that fall in sterling that we saw after the June vote in 2016.
And in terms of people with mortgages and credit card loans, particularly unsecured loans, which is, I'm told, the next massive financial crisis waiting to sweep across these islands, is this because you describe it as a relatively incremental, a relatively small rise. I mean, statistics
they've just done it, actually. It's just been announced that they have hiked rates
to
0.5% as expected, and 7 people voted for a hike, with 2 voting to keep rates on hold.
And that means we're now dealing in the realms of reality rather than the realms of speculation. What will that mean for my mortgage and everybody else's?
If you've got a variable rate mortgage, you'll probably see it increase slightly, pretty quickly, because that's the way those variable rate mortgages last. But we are going to have to listen to Mark Carney, who is speaking in half an hour, to actually see, well, is this a rate hiking cycle or is this one and done? We don't know that yet. We're assuming that they're not going to be hiking rates soon. So it could be just a small increase if you've got a variable rate mortgage.
OK, forgive me. It's 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, joined by Kathleen Brooks, who's the research director at City Index, and responding to the news that the UK interest rate, the Bank of England have just revealed, has gone up from 0.25% to 0.5%. Now, this is my sort of thicko question, if you'll permit me one, Kathleen, because you say it's not a very big rise, but of course, looked at from another perspective, it's doubled.
It has doubled. But this is the first rise in 10 years. Also, so we're back. So back in June 2016, we were at 0.5% rate, and we then had that. But we then had the Brexit vote, and that's when they got cut to 0.25%. So that's a record low as well in interest rates. So it is all relative, James.
And how much do we know about the sort of loan markets and the unsecured loans that are out there? How close are we to some sort of precipice on that question of unsecured personal debt?
Well, there are mixed pictures. Yes, we are the most indebted we've been, but consumers have actually started to pull back on spending, and we've seen the savings rate actually go up. So people are saving that a little bit more, possibly because they're concerned about maybe interest rate hikes in the future, but also they're worried about kind of a rainy day and a bad economic outlook for the UK. So in that sense, we've actually seen the consumers start to protect themselves. Obviously not everyone. It is a small rise in the savings rate, but that is pretty positive when we see we see consumer indebtedness at the levels that it currently is.
And what finally would constitute a sort of fantastic result? What should we be looking for in the next 12 months to silence people worried that we are approaching a period of grave economic uncertainty? What would look like brilliant news from the Bank of England in the next 12 to 18 months?
I think it's all got to be about wages. This is the thing, that we've been able to create jobs in this country, but wage growth has just been pathetically low. And I think if we saw stronger wage growth, that would serve, not too strong, because you don't want interest rates to have to rise too much on the back of it. But if we saw some nice wage growth to the tune of 2, 3, 3.5% over the next 12 months. That would definitely be a sign that the UK economy is going to do well. It's, the consumer will be bolstered a bit more, and we could see some life come back into our high streets, for example.
Because as long as wage growth is lower than inflation, people's income is being cut in real terms every month, every year, every sector, quarter.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's been devastating for a lot of people because inflation has been high, certainly in the last the last 12 months.
Kathleen Brooks, Research Director at City Index. Many thanks indeed for your insights. If you're just joining us, the interest rates have indeed gone up from 0.25% to 0.5%. The impact upon you will depend on just how much debt you have, and indeed with regards to mortgages, whether or not your mortgage is variable or fixed rate. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And curious, said Alice, the pound does appear to have wobbled a bit, but judging by our expert contributors, it should level up. What I want to do now is speak to people who I envy. I'd like to speak to people who have quite a clear grip upon their personal finances. People who don't just leave everything to their wife. People who know precisely what interest rate they're paying on their mortgages and exactly how exposed they are financially to debt. And I want you to tell me how this is going to affect you. And that's all that I want you to do. You know precisely where you sit on the financial scale. It seems to me there are 3 variables in that relationship, 3 points, if you will, to that triangle. One is interest rates, which have just gone up, if you're joining us, from 0.25% to 0.5%. The first increase since 2007, July 2007, up from a kind of historic all-time low. That's variable number 1. Variable number 2 is inflation, which stands, it'll come to me in a moment, I think at 3.2. I'll double check. So you've got interest rates, you've got inflation, and then you've got either the performance of the pound or your personal financial situation. So a rough calculation would see the interest rate rise on a £150,000 mortgage go up by about 20 quid. If you've got a £500,000 mortgage, then your monthly increase is likely to be about £74. It seems to me that many of us live at the moment in a slightly Mr. Micawber-ish kind of way, except we're on the wrong side of Mr. Micawber's happiness formula. We are mostly, and I'm not at the moment, I want to make that clear, but I have at various other points previously in my life spending a little bit more than I'm bringing in. And if you are doing that, then I suppose I'm wondering how this news impacts upon you. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. And this is a very different inquiry from the one that I usually make, because I want to hear Mark Carney's speech at 12:30, and we've only got sort of 15 or so minutes once we factored in the break between now and then. And I possibly should be looking more at wonks and number crunchers, and maybe we will. But I'd just like to give you a chance to talk to me about your personal financial situation. I am a complete klutz when it comes to these sort of issues. To the enduring despair of my wife, I have very, very little knowledge of our own personal situation. I probably understand economics on a national level more than I do on a domestic level. I don't know why. It's just the way I was made. And please, with the help of our Lord, I'll become a better person. But you, as someone who keeps a very, very close eye upon your financial situation, what does this mean to you? 0345 60 60973. The plan is that this will bring down inflation. I don't know whether or not you need to be a fully paid up member of some financial organisation to comment upon the likelihood of that coming to pass. You know how much more you're probably going to have to pay on your mortgage. How many people listening to this programme now are worried that they won't be able to, albeit that it's a relatively small increase in their mortgage repayments? Are you worried that you might actually not be able to pay? 0345 60 60973. Inflation currently stands at 3%. Wage growth is a fraction of that figure. So every single month that passes, we are spending more and in real terms earning less. Prediction is for next year 2.4%. So all of these variables kick in. But I often wonder on days like today, and on budget day as well, I often wonder how many of us have a proper understanding of what our personal relationship is with the broader fiscal realities. If you fall into that category, then I'd particularly like to take your call before the Governor of the Bank of England shares his insights and reasonings. 0345 6060 973. I can give you some of the official commentary from the bank, and then we'll get some unofficial analysis, ideally from you. The decision to leave the European Union is having a noticeable impact on the economic outlook. The overshoot of inflation throughout the forecast predominantly reflects the effect on import prices of the referendum-related fall in sterling. Uncertainties associated with Brexit are weighing on domestic activity, which has slowed even as global growth has risen significantly, and Brexit-related constraints on investment and labour supply appear to be reinforcing the market slowdown that has been increasingly evident in recent years in the rate at which the economy can grow without generating inflationary pressures. So what does all this mean to you? It's 13 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC as we record the fact that the record low interest rates that the country has enjoyed for the best part, well, for just over a decade, are no more. In September, the Monetary Policy Committee laid the groundwork for an increase over the coming months if economic growth remained stable. Stable is, of course, or stability is, of course, in the eye of the beholder, but the reason why this base rate is important is because commercial banks use it as a reference point for their accounts and loans. So there will be people listening to this who are celebrating, I presume, because you have got a lot of capital, you've got a lot of savings, and the paltry returns you've been getting on those savings recently, suddenly, overnight, today, become marginally less paltry. The importance of having a fixed rate mortgage as opposed to a variable, or indeed vice versa. There's a slight degree of gamble involved in choosing variable over fixed rate, because you could end up losing either way. If interest rates move a lot and you're fixed, you could end up being a winner. If interest rates don't move at all and you're fixed above a low rate, then you could end up being a loser. But it's that personal relationship with the 3 points of this triangle that intrigues me the most. 0345 6060 973. And, you know, given that we've done two and a bit hours on Brexit already, where, to be honest, you have to have your head so far up your fundament to see anything but misery on the horizon, I'd really like to speak to people for whom this is good news today, albeit that it's brought about as a result of bad news, self-inflicted economic damage. Some British people, some residents of this country, will be looking at the rise in interest rates and have something good to say. It's 12:15. It's a bit like the conversation we had with the fella in York who was laying his patio, the difference between looking at the news, listening to the expert analysis, or just sort of crossing your fingers and hoping that the evidence exposed to your eyes and ears turns out to be more important and more accurate than that given by the experts. Bank of England has growth, just digging into some of this detail now, at 1.6 to 1.7% for the next few years, and believes that that is just above potential. I mean, that's shocking. If, as this piece of today's report, the MPC's most recent assessment of the outlook for inflation and activity is, if I'm understanding it properly, then they're estimating that potential growth is going to be around 1.5%. 1.5% growth. And I'm sympathetic to the argument that we need to find new measures of economic success, because we've been going through periods of growth for years and most people feel considerably worse off than they used to do. But that is, here you go, Duncan Weldon, who I used to work with at Newsnight. He's gone back into the business now. He's a very respected economist. Bank has growth at 1.6, 1.7% for the next few years and believes that is just above potential. Ouch, this is news. If the bank really thinks potential growth is circa 1.5%, then that is properly grim. And this argument is fleshed out in the inflation report. Long-running productivity weakness plus Brexit equals low potential growth. Peter's in Reading. How's it all going to affect you, Peter?
Hello, James.
Hello, mate.
We're having all this, news about, the young people on mortgages and that sort of how it's going to affect them. What about the pensioners that for the last 8 to 10 years have seen their capital, which they were going to live on, go from 6% to 0.25? And also, these are pensioners were paying 17% mortgage back in the 80s. I mean, hardly anything's been said about that. We're all worried about
the triple lock. I mean, you're talking about savings and investments rather than using pensioners in the context of people who've retired, because the massive majority of them won't have any savings at all, and the government has moved to protect their income, hasn't it, with 3 separate locks, the triple lock on pensions. So you're really just talking about investors. You're saying, what about investors who rely upon their capital for an income?
As I say, a lot of pensioners, this is what people don't realise,
I think they do.
Carney as well, they don't realise that the majority of people, I know it's gone up 2.5%, but that's only in recent years. It wasn't like from 2008, was it?
What wasn't?
The link. Pension link.
So I think what you're saying is I should get more of a return on the money that I already have, and I'm sick of hearing young people complain about the fact that they haven't got any money at all and can't get a return on anything. I
think fair play, actually. People that are saved for their old age, I mean, why don't you want to give them a good return on their money?
Because if interest rates were higher, then people who need to borrow to make their way in the world today wouldn't be able to. And we've already seen a collapse in the housing market, the property market for the younger generation. And I guess buying a house gets even harder now.
Yeah, but you're talking about the people in the 80s, 70s and 80s.
I mean, I guess I find it, personally, because my house is my asset and I haven't paid for it all yet, personally, I find it hard to feel sympathy for people who've got assets when we're living in a country at the moment where there is a growing number of people who don't have any assets. And they, of course, rely more upon borrowing just to stay afloat, and borrowing just got harder.
Well, I had 3 jobs when I first started getting my house.
How much did your house cost?
Well, it cost about, I don't know, 8,000, 10,000.
And what was the average national income at the time?
Well, my wage was about £46 a week.
So what was the national average income at the time?
I couldn't really say. We didn't go.
If you go back to the 50s, it was about 3.5 times. You go to the 70s, it was around 3 times. If you move now, the average income is 26,500, and the average house, if you live in the southeast, is 600,000.
You just got to work harder.
Okay. How many hours are there in the day?
If you want it, you will work harder to get it.
Okay.
This is it.
Yeah.
But I still don't appreciate that, the people sort of who were paying 17% mortgage years ago and saving as well and working really hard and, and it's all about
Here's the thing,
nowadays.
Peter. Let me tell you something that I suspect is going to come as a big surprise to you. The people today who can't afford to buy houses, they're already working really hard.
I know some of them are. I know some of them are. I listen to your programme generally, and they are working really hard, and I really feel sorry for them. I really do.
Yeah, but
I know how hard I work.
If it's a choice between giving them some money and giving it to you, then it's a no-brainer. Of course, you deserve it more.
Well, what about legal aid and things like that?
Yeah, down with that.
We're spending about 12, 13 billion for that.
I know.
Why don't we help our own?
Well, I think you mean foreign aid, not legal aid, don't you?
Well, foreign aid. We're giving legal aid to one of these jihadists, somebody. But I say, regarding that, I mean, let's look after our own. We have got problems in this country, and it's about time we did look after our own.
And the best way to look after our own is to take the people who've got savings and got capital and got money to invest and give them even more. Danny's in Woodford. Danny, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. First time caller.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Just ringing up. I'm 27 years old. Just looking at the housing market and sort of been monitoring it for a while. Just how low sort of interest rates have been for such a long time, inflation and real-term wages, and how that all sort of links together. Currently in the rental market and no sort of desire to get into the housing market and placing myself in that situation. As soon as interest rates go up, in my personal view, I'm not an expert on the subject, but you're going to put yourself in quite a precarious position.
Well, this is why I found Peter's impenetrable position so depressing, because we're already looking at a generation that, for the first time in living memory, is less likely to be able to buy a home than their own parents, and now we've doubled the base rate of interest, which is the most fundamental factor when it comes to working out whether or not you can afford to get a mortgage.
Very true.
But hey, what about the pensioners?
So yeah, well, that's it. But there's such cheap credit out there, such cheap money that I think we're definitely going to go into some sort of financial turmoil very soon. So,
what are you going to do? Because I mean, I've always seen renting. My friend Wayne in Basildon always tells me off about this, but it's just the way I was raised. The mortgage is the asset for me. The house is the bricks and mortar. He sees it as, he always translates it from the French like a death tax or whatever the correct phrase is, and he prefers renting. He says if the boiler goes, it gets sorted. If you've got a half decent landlord, you're better off renting. Whereas I always feel that that's throwing money up the wall. Where do you stand on that?
yeah, very true. But I always say to people, it's a roof over your head. What else are you going to do? You don't really have much choice in the matter. But if we do go into financial turmoil, then, I've got savings that I have saved up and hopefully penetrate the housing market when it's at a slump, rather than at the moment in London especially. It's very...
although it could be coming down. You just heard in the news it's rising in the northwest much faster than it's rising here. The Evening Standard reported last night that the sort of boom years may have come to an end. I oddly, given that I've just waxed lyrical about how delighted and how important I considered it to get a house, I'd be comfortable seeing prices come down, as long as it doesn't push lots and lots of people into negative equity. If house prices levelled out a little or even came down a bit, I think it would be very good for the nation, because we seem to have spent much of the last 7 years pouring money into the pockets of institutional investors and buy-to-let landlords in the property market, and absentee foreign owners as well, while seeing people like Danny and many others from that generation, around my age and younger, being priced out of the market themselves. And yet you still have people saying, I think we should look after our own in the context of an economic system that does precisely the opposite. Josh is in Brighton. Josh, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First time calling you guys, calling into you. I've just listened to some of your callers. Firstly, it's the first time I've ever agreed with every word you said to that pensioner. I thought it was absolutely ridiculous what you were saying.
You just need to work harder, Josh, mate.
The second thing is, I'm actually a mortgage advisor, but I'm 26, so I'm kind of at that age of people feeling disadvantaged. But there's always a positive spin to negative news. Now, with the base rate going up by 0.25%, when it came down, people tend to be a lot more lackadaisical about their finances. Think, right, rates are coming down, so my borrowing's coming down, I'll be fine. Now it's going back up to 0.5%. People suddenly panic and they think, right, I need to sort my finances out. So as a mortgage advisor, we tend to get a lot more inquiries when there's a feeling that rates might go up. So even they're actually only going up incrementally by 0.25%, which isn't a massive increase, historically. What it does mean is that more and more people actually are active in terms of sorting out their finances.
Yes.
And making so it's, in a way, it's positive news, because people that are stuck on a standard variable rate, not necessarily stuck actually, they've just kind of left their mortgage to be on a standard variable rate, or their credit cards are perhaps on a variable interest rate or something like that.
So because we've had 10 years of stasis, if you will, 10 years of no movement at all, there's a complacency that sets in, that a move, because I guess if you're your age, you've never known interest rates as an earner to be higher than 0.25%, have you?
Not really, no.
No, you haven't, unless you were working at 15.
0.5.
Yeah. So,
exactly.
So that means now that you look at all your debts and all your outgoings, and you actually start making slightly more informed decisions about what you should be doing in the future. The problem is that we need to divide the world into Joshes and Jameses. How many people are like you and are going to be getting their abacuses out and doing their work properly, because as a mortgage advisor, obviously it's second nature to you, and how many people are like me and generally make like an ostrich whenever financial matters?
But I've got to be honest, when we go and see a lot of people that have left their mortgage on variable rates for years and years because of the complacency, like you just talked about.
Yeah.
But as soon as people start seeing their payments going up instead of down, you'd be surprised how active people do get that.
Well, I'd say it's an odd silver lining, I think, as you acknowledged yourself, but it's a very useful insight. It's 12:30. Mark Carney's just poured himself a glass of water. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.